Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple, the show where we talk about all things board game related. Today we're bringing you a Kickstarter preview. This one is for Nemesis by Awaken Realms, the same guys that brought you guys Lords of Hellas last year, which is a huge game. Same applies to this.
Yeah, and both, of course, have some incredible miniatures at its core.
So before we get into talking about the game, this is 100% a prototype. Almost everything in here is a prototype, including the miniatures that we received. But it's pretty close to being done. The gameplay structure is there. This game is broken into a variety of different paths. You can play it competitively. You can play it cooperatively. There is a campaign mode, and there's even a mode that once you die in the game, or if you do die, you then will become an alien. Yeah,
and we played it competitively when we played because we didn't have time to get through all of the different versions of it, and they're still iterating on it for sure. But even the competitive mode has some opportunities for slight cooperation.
Yeah. So what's going on here? You are on board the Nemesis. This is a ship in space, and it has intruders, which are aliens.
It has intruders for sure.
And they look very much like aliens, and what you're doing is you are hibernating on the ship. And then you wake up and you find out they're everywhere. And you're trying to get your ship back to Earth while also completing a very specific objective that you have and only you have in secret. No one else knows what this objective is.
Right. What's really cool about these aliens is they don't start out in the ship, you know, at least that you can see.
Yeah.
There's a good portion of this game where you're walking around through the ship very carefully with a lot of intensity, hoping you're not making enough sound to alert the alien presence.
In fact, it feels very safe the first 2 or 3 rounds. Yeah, you feel like, what's going on here? This is simple. It's easy. I'm moving around. But you quickly learn that every movement that you do in the game creates noise.
Yeah.
And you're going to be placing these noise tokens in every corridor that typically in every corridor, depending upon a dice roll on where you move. If 2 of those noise tokens come up in the same corridor, it's going to spawn a random alien from this bag.
Right.
And then you have to deal with it. And this isn't typically a game about combat. You are on the short end of the stick in combat. You're almost always going to lose or not fare very well. So you want to get as far away from these guys as you can because killing them doesn't give you anything. There's no objective on killing them.
It just keeps you alive.
It keeps you alive, and you are literally trying to survive. So it recreates that feeling of something that is intruding your ship and is much more powerful than you.
Yeah, the feeling of survival here is truly underscored. You start to feel very much like this is just do whatever you can to make it to the end of the game and achieve whatever goals you need to achieve before that time.
It also makes you think about your path up on the ship and where you're going, because you know if you go through corridors that already have noise tokens in them, a second noise token is going to make you draw one of these from the bag, and they're awful. Like some of these are larvae, but some of them are queens. So they range, there's 5 different types of aliens within the game. So let's actually talk about the competitive aspect of the game. Each player is going to start with one of 5 different character classes. I have a captain in front of me. David has a scientist in front of him. There's a scout, there's a stormtrooper, and there's also
a pilot.
A pilot, yes. And you're going to pick one of those randomly, and then each player is going to be given a turn order. The captain's always going to go first in the game. Each player also has a deck of cards, of 10 cards that are unique to them. Some of the cards are shared between each of the different players, so everybody's going to have a search card, everyone's going to have some basic combat cards, but you have things that are uniquely inherent to your character and what they do. Each player is also going to start with 2 very specific pieces of equipment that are tailored to that particular character and what they do best on the ship.
Yeah, it's really cool. The way the characters are differentiated in their decks really give you the flavor for each of those characters. For instance, when I played as the scout. And Jeremy mentioned earlier, you're moving around making noise, but the scout is actually more adept at moving around more quietly. I get to re-roll some of those dice to determine what aliens or if aliens are alerted to my presence, things like that. Whereas the pilot's going to be better at things like going in and changing coordinates and getting some things done that a pilot would do.
You're also going to start with a beautifully detailed miniature, and it's going to start in the Hibernatorium chamber. This is where you're waking up on the ship. Each player is also going to have one specific objective. You're going to draw 2 objectives and pick one of those randomly. These objectives give you things you need to do on the ship in order to fulfill them and then finish the game. You can't win the game if you have not completed your objective, regardless of whether or not you survive till the end.
Yeah, and these are what's really interesting about the game too, because there's overall objective. The whole concept is that we're trying to get the ship back to Earth. We're trying to get the engines working. We're trying to either get into the escape pods or the hibernation center again. But your primary goal might change some of those a little bit. Mine might say, no, you actually want to go to Mars. Or, by the way, you don't want player 2 surviving.
Yep. Also, you're going to have a number of charges or ammunition on each of the different pieces of equipment. So you're going to mark those. Again, this is a prototype, so we have some random cubes on here. There'll be much better markings within the game. The map itself is the Nemesis ship. We have a game kind of in progress, but we're going to talk about it as if it was a blank slate. Everyone's going to start in the center chamber. This is 2 chambers, but it's actually 1 giant spot. You're going to notice on here a number of corridors. These will link rooms together and provide paths for players to explore. When you look below here, you're going to see room numbers. You're going to randomly draw some room numbers, either level 1 rooms or level 2 rooms, and place them on each of the different locations. Some of the rooms may be used in a game, some may not. Then you're going to place exploration tokens on top of each of these rooms to denote what could possibly happen in that room when you first discover it.
Right. Already there's a lot of variability in how you set this thing up because, like Jeremy said, the rooms are randomly placed, but on top of that, those extra tokens on top really change up even what those rooms are going to be like when you reveal them.
Yep. At the back of the ship, you have 3 engines. The goal here is to get these engines working. You randomly put out an engine 1, an engine 2, and engine 3. On the back side of these, they either say working or not working. So you're going to have to find the room that can make those engines work and then turn them back on. At the front of the ship, you have coordinates. On this coordinate card, you have 4 different locations that the ship could go to. It's always going to be pointed towards B at the start of the game, which in this case is the new galaxy. So you need to re-steer it, find the control room to be able to steer this towards Earth. And then you're going to basically start the game. So there's a variety of different things you can do in this game. We're going to go through them in order. So everybody was going to start with 6 of their cards in their hand. They're going to randomly shuffle up their 10 cards and put 6 of them in their hand. How you use these cards is very important for the actions in the game. This is basically your ability to do very specific things. Basic actions, whenever you take them, you have to expend a card. So it's making your hand size a little bit smaller for that round. Every single action, that's movement, escaping creatures or intruders that you're in the same room with, passing items to other players, picking up objects, shooting, or even doing close combat with those. Every time you do one of those basic actions, you're expending a card. So you can go down to no cards by the end of your turn. That's not always the best choice.
No.
Because anytime you encounter an intruder, say you go into a room with only 1 or 2 cards in your hand, or an intruder comes to you, you have to draw a panic card. And depending upon a number on that panic card, it can cause you to panic, meaning that that card is going to affect you, and every time you encounter something new in the game, it's also going to affect you. So you want to keep a high hand limit so you're not suffering the consequences of those panics.
Yeah, those panic cards have a little bit of a math problem that you work against the number of cards that are left in your hand. So you basically, the more safety blanket that you have in your hand of cards, the less likely you are to become panicked.
Let's talk about some of the basic actions. So movement and combat. Let's talk about those 2 very specifically. Anytime you move, you're moving from one location to another. And that, again, that's expending 1 of the cards. When you move, you're simply going to take, well, there would be no alien in there, but when you move, you're simply going to move into the new location and then explore it. You're first going to flip over this, and it's going to tell you the search value of that room, and then any special ability. Some rooms may be on fire. Some of the rooms may have malfunctions the moment that you walk in there. Some of the rooms have bulkheads that close right behind you, meaning you're trapped and you have to go another way around, but also prevents aliens coming into that room as well. Some of them don't require you to roll the noise die, but typically you're always going to roll the noise die. One of the also things in this mode of the gameplay, anytime you move, if you're in the same room as another player, that player can follow you along as well, but they also have to expend a card. So you're going to flip over this room tile and figure out what it is. Then you're going to look at the number on here, and you're going to match up the room number to that number. That's how many times that room can be searched. There's cards in your deck that allow you to search that room to find new weapons, new technology, and new health packs, and so forth.
Yeah, and this is really cool. The way they've done these tiles is once you've used a search action in a room, you simply rotate it and until you get down to 0.
Yeah.
And then everyone knows that that room can no longer be searched.
That also opens up new options or actions for you by taking the room action instead of doing a basic action. Let's go back to this token. Anytime you move, you are typically going to roll the die. And when you roll a die, it's going to tell you a couple different things. If it is a number, it's going to tell you where you've created noise around that room. So if it was a 1, I'd put it here. If it was a 3 or 4, I'd put it over here. If it is an X, you've created no noise. Of course, moving to this room creates no noise anyway. And then if it's an exclamation mark, that's going to mean that any intruder that is around that room is going to come right to you.
Right. That's the exclamation point in this case is not a good thing. And one other thing is when you're placing those tokens out, in another example, if we'd already had tokens here and we created noise in either one of these halls, those would remove, an alien would immediately spawn, we'd pull one from the bag, and it would come straight into that room from that direction.
There's a variety of different aliens in the game. There's queens, there's breeders, there's adults, there's young adults, and then there's larvae. Larvae are the kind of like the chest poppers. You don't want to have these things inside of you. You want to kill them as soon as possible because there are events that happen at the end of the entire round that can create those things into young adults if that event comes out, and that will kill you instantly. So again, you want to try to deal with the things that you can deal with and then run away from the things that you can't deal with. When you have to deal with something, you have to do combat. That's one of the other actions you can take in your turn. Combat in this game is completely dice driven, but it's very simple. You're going to look at the availability of the things you have in front of you. I have a revolver, and I can choose either to shoot it or punch it. Typically, you don't want to punch an alien. I mean, again, this game really tells you that the aliens are more powerful than you. If you punch it and you roll a specific thing on your die, it's going to do a serious wound to you. We'll talk about wounds in a moment. But anyway, when you roll your die, it's going to give you some values on there, either 1 hit, 2 hits, or hitting eggs, youngs, or adults, which the smaller the alien, the more chances you're going to roll that on your die.
Right. You can always get the hits, but when you're trying to fight a queen, for instance, there's fewer sides that are going to help you. And then, of course, there's one side that's not good for anyone. That's the miss.
Yeah. The other cool thing is the creatures typically don't have any base hit points. So a queen doesn't have any specific set hit points, and neither do any of the other aliens. They all have a card that will come up and tell you what its hit points are for that particular piece of combat. In this case, he has 6 health. So if I don't do 6 damage, I place those wounds on how much damage I do, and I can decide if I want to shoot it again or have combat with it again. And then I would flip another card and then look at that new value. So it always has a new amount of hit points, but it's retaining the damage that it has from the previous set of combat.
Yeah, it does an interesting thing. It kind of abstracts the alien presence to some degree, but at the same time, it also keeps it really exciting because you never really know exactly what you're up against from one shot to the next.
If you fight a young alien once, it could be a stronger young alien than a different one that you fight. Also, the actions that you can take are dependent upon the cards. So say I wanted to take any of those 6 basic actions, it's basically discarding one of my cards from my hand. But also, every single one of these cards in your deck has its own ability or action. Some of them, you just play the card and take the action. Some of them require you a specific number of cards that you have to expend on top of that card. Plus, some of them can be used in combat, and some of them can't be used if you are in the same room as an intruder.
Yeah, exactly. There's a little icon that has a little pistol with an X through it. You can't use those if you're in a room with an intruder. And some of the decks for some of these characters have quite a few of those.
Absolutely. And don't forget the room actions themselves. You can take the action of the room. All these rooms, there's about 20 different rooms right now in the game that we played that provide different abilities for the characters. They allow them to search, they allow them to upgrade equipment, they allow them to change coordinates or heal themselves or whatnot.
Yeah, and you'll really start to realize that these rooms aren't just there for show. In the kind of whether you're playing this cooperatively or competitively, you're going to need to go around all these rooms to do these various things. There's a room that gives you health back. You're going to need to go there.
Yeah, because you will be taking damage through the course of the game. You have a tracker on the right side of your player board that says light wound, serious wound. You're allowed to take 2 light wounds before it turns into a serious wound. You're allowed to have 4 serious wounds before you die and are out of the game. But those serious wounds inhibit your ability to move. They are awful to deal with.
Right. One other thing you can do in these rooms, we talked about it a little bit, is search them. And when you search them, a number of different things that can happen. Some of which are you're going to be collecting some of these cards here, depending on the room or depending on the type of search you're doing.
The color of the room is dependent upon what kind of thing you can search from.
And I mean, this has anything from items that's going to help you heal. There's some ammunition or weapons, and then there's some sort of tech type items, right? That you can actually collect and then ultimately collect pieces and parts and build new weapons, like a flamethrower.
So once each of the players is done around the table and they've taken all the actions that they wish to take, remember a lot of the time you're going to be holding cards in your hand because you don't want to go into a situation where you have very few cards and an intruder comes into your room and you have to suffer panic. However, at the end of your turn, you are allowed to discard any number of cards because you typically are going to draw back up to 6 cards, so it's a give or take, push your luck type aspect in there. At the end of the round, when all that happens, you're going to go into the intruder phase. If you're in the same room as an intruder, that intruder is going to attack you. We're not going to talk about all the attacks and how they work. They're pretty simple. They're easy to manage. And then you're going to deal with fires. If you're in a room with fire, that's bad. You're going to take a serious wound right off the bat. It will do 1 damage to the intruders, but it's not awful for them.
No.
And then you're going to draw an event. So that event's going to tell you how the aliens that are still on the board are going to move. It's also going to tell you anything special that could happen on the ship, whether it's good or typically bad in that case.
Yeah, this is the part where you really need to consider that panic situation for sure, because once the aliens start moving, again, they're not all going to necessarily move. Some of them might not move at all.
Yeah.
But if you're in a location with aliens around you, there's a reasonably good chance that one of them might show up in your room, and you need some cards in your hand for sure.
One very, very important aspect, too, as we said from the very start, you don't want to go into this guns blazing. You're going to get destroyed if you try to do that. So another way that it handles that at the end of the phase, you're going to draw back up to 6 cards. You want to have a healthy hand of cards. However, if you end the phase in the same room as an intruder, not only is it going to attack you, but you only get to draw 2 cards. Instead of up to 6 cards. So you don't want to end your phase in those areas. You want to escape. You want to leave.
Yeah, they've really done a good job of putting mechanically into the game what they need to underscore that fact.
Yeah.
You know, you do that once and you won't forget it again, and you'll realize it's more about survival than it is attacking.
We're just touching on the game. There's one more thing I want to talk about. Of course, we can't talk about the campaign. We can't talk about the co-op mode because we haven't played them, but I want to talk about infections. Again, this gives you the feeling that you're being infected by these things. When you become infected, either through an event or the larva being in your body, you're going to typically draw one of these contamination cards. It has the same backing as your 10 cards from your deck. This is going to slide into your deck. It's going to take up a slot in your hand. You can't use these cards to take basic actions. They just block you.
Just clog it up.
The other cool thing is there is a decoder. When you put that decoder on there, it tells you if you are infected or not. This is a cool aspect because if you end the game with these in your deck, you still may not be able to win if you are infected because that's going to burst through your chest and kill you at the end of the game. There are ways, medical rooms, to be able to get these cards out of your deck. So you're going to know that you're going to get harmed in the game. You know you're going to get contaminated either by getting hurt by something, an event. So you're managing your movement, managing not dealing with these things, and then managing the contamination. It's a very cool aspect.
Yeah, the contamination, the cards alone are a really cool touch with the decoder because you could do that in a number of ways mechanically, but the fact that you end your game with maybe one, maybe a few contamination cards, and then taking the decoder to determine whether or not you actually won or if you lost.
Yeah. So that, guys, is Nemesis. Stay tuned to the Kickstarter page because I'm excited to see the co-op mode as well. I think you and I would both love that aspect because you'd be dealing with all this stuff together instead of trying to screw other people, which you can do in the.
It is interesting, the sort of slight betrayal aspect of this game.
If you guys have any questions about the game, make them in the comments below. I know it's a lot of game here. That's a good thing. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and everything else that we do, and we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.
This Kickstarter preview has been brought to you by Man vs. Meeple in sponsorship with Quartermaster Logistics. Take a look at all of their fulfillment solutions at qmlogistics.com.